From 1948, there is only Israel, and Palestinians are encroachers, criminals, and terrorists in their own land. Since the occupation of the West Bank, 7,000 Palestinians have been killed. Nobody has been called into television studios to condemn ongoing acts of violence for over 75 years by the apartheid Israeli state. Palestine has been born in prison and knows only prison. Gaza is completely sealed off from the rest of the world by Israel's apartheid war, and just like prisoners, we are punished for misbehaving. By conversations with all my friends, my group chats, my phone calls, every single person said they are going to kill us all. We know from direct experience what Israel's policy of revenge means. 75-year-old war that Israel has been waging on the Palestinian people by answering this question first. But do you condemn the Hamas action? This belligerent question reminds me of the words of the Palestinian poet Murid Barghouti, who said, "If you want to dispossess a people, the simplest way to do it is to tell their story, but to start with secondly. Start with and end with the freeze frame, the close-up, obliterate the ongoing off-screen scene." As Bassem Youssef, Egyptian comedian and television host, retorted when being pushed in a studio to condemn Hamas, do you condemn Hamas? He said, imagine a world without Hamas. What would that world look like? Let us give this world a name. Let us call it West Bank. Hamas has no control over West Bank, and yet in August alone, 37 Palestinian kids were killed. No music festival, no Hamas. Since the occupation of the West Bank, 7,000 Palestinians have been killed. No music festival, no Hamas. This is what Bassem Youssef said. In other words, Palestinians and those who support Palestine are continuously called upon to condemn acts of violence by the Palestinian resistance, but nobody has been called into television studios to condemn ongoing acts of violence for over 75 years by the apartheid Israeli state. Let me, in the words of many Palestinians, reframe what Hamas did on October 7th. Palestinians say what it did was stage a prison break. It was a prison break. Part of the purpose of my talk today is to amplify Palestinian voices that we do not get to see in mainstream media in India. If you look at the newspapers that we see or any of the mainstream media, you would imagine that there is Israel under attack and only Israel under attack. So let me quote a little at length from an article by Mariam Barghouti, a Palestinian American based in Ramallah in the West Bank. This is how she describes how Palestinians saw what happened on October 7th. I'm quoting her now. In the early morning hours of Saturday, October 7th, Palestinians across the West Bank woke up to the sound of explosions. No one really knew what was happening until reports started trickling in that fighters from Gaza had taken control of the Beit Hanun crossing, the only crossing through which Gaza residents may reach the rest of historic Palestine on the extremely rare occasions that the occupier allows them to. Soon information appeared on social media that the wall that Israel had erected around the Gaza Strip to keep its 2.3 million people permanently imprisoned had been breached. And then came the images and footage of the broken wall. In one video showing a bulldozer bringing down the wall, a Palestinian man can be heard chanting, "Yes, go, Allahu Akbar, hit it guys, rest in peace, wall." This is what the residents of Palestine saw and heard. It felt surreal. I'm going back to Mariam Barghouti now. We wondered how it was possible that the people of Gaza had broken out of their prison. Only political prisoners can understand what we felt at that moment. The vast majority of the Palestinian population remaining in historic Palestine has been born in prison and knows only prison. Gaza is completely sealed off from the rest of the world by Israel's apartheid war, subjected to a debilitating siege, And in the occupied West Bank too, all entry and exit points of every Palestinian village, town and city are controlled by the Israeli occupation forces. Our imprisonment features prison labor. As in a real prison, we are subjected to round-the-clock surveillance. And just like prisoners, we are punished for misbehaving. In Gaza, punishment means indiscriminate bombardment of densely populated areas that always results in the mass killing of civilians. In this context, seeing those images and videos of the prison wall torn down in Gaza is liberating. Their symbolic power cannot be overstated. Of course, we knew what was to come. We knew war had broken out the moment Palestinians in Gaza broke out of the Israeli prison. By conversations with all my friends, my group chats, my phone calls, every single person said they are going to kill us all. We know from direct experience what Israel's policy of revenge means. We also know that no matter what savagery its army commits, the West would stand by it and point out to Palestinian crimes. And of course, that is what is happening now. But we have been prisoners in our land for generations, but this October, the wimpy kid finally got his punch and the bully is now shaken. As our oppressors are out killing indiscriminately in blind rage, an uncomfortable feeling is creeping in among them that the prison they are holding us in has started to crumble. This is the voice of a Palestinian woman who lives in Ramallah on the West Bank. This is what that moment looks like for Palestinians, breaking out of prison. And never mind the price we pay, but the prison has started to crumble. This view is worth remembering. It cannot be stated often enough that the migration of Jews from all over the world into their so-called homeland, Israel, was not into a space that was vacant of people. The Palestinians living there for millennia had to be forcibly evicted. There has been a steady swallowing of Palestinian lands. There has been a steady swallowing of Palestinian lands by Jewish settlements, herding of Palestinian people into their continually shrinking little slivers of West Bank and Gaza. How is Palestinian land taken over? By a variety of strategies, by military force, guns and bombs, primarily from non-combatant, civilian farm families. This sudden discovery that civilians are being killed in this war has never struck anybody when Palestinian civilians have been killed, evicted, and thrown off their ancestral land. By demolishing Palestinian homes on flimsy legal grounds or punitively, and since Palestinians cannot obtain building permits from Israel, many suddenly homeless Palestinians have to vacate their land, which is then taken over for Jewish families. The Knesset passed a draft law in 2011 that would require Palestinians to pay for the demolition costs of their own homes, and now their strategy is to make Palestinians self-demolish their own homes, as Israeli authorities did in a neighborhood of occupied East Jerusalem early last year. Until 1948, there was no Israel. Map showed a country called Palestine. From 1948, there is only Israel, and Palestinians are encroachers, criminals, and terrorists in their own land. This is why the Birzeit University Union says unequivocally, an occupying colonial power cannot claim the right to self-defense against the people under its brutal occupation. There is no moral equivalence between the colonizer and the colonized. So this is the firstly, which Barghouti tells us we should begin with. This is the firstly. Now we can move to the secondly. What is the secondly? That the Hamas is a creation of Israel and its allies. Hamas was launched in 1988 in Gaza at the time of the First Intifada with a charter that denied legitimacy to the existence of the Israeli state, but in a pattern familiar with imperialist powers all over the globe. For about a decade earlier, Israel had supported the emergence of this right-wing Islamist force that became Hamas as a counter to Yasser Arafat's Fatah party, which formed the heart of the PLO. Fatah was secular, a leftist guerrilla movement, and Israel considered it to be its main enemy. So they supported and built up the conditions under which Hamas could emerge. After the 1993 Oslo Accords, the situation changed. Israel formally recognized the PLO. Hamas became the enemy. Hamas refused to accept Israel or to renounce violence, and it became the leading institution of Palestinian resistance to Israeli occupation, which, far beyond religious ideology, is the main reason for its continued popularity among Palestinians, because the PLO is seen to have compromised and sold out to some extent. Hamas appears as resistance to occupation. That is what is appealing to the Palestinian people. It won the election in Gaza in 2007, a development that was obviously annoyed the West, and Fatah too was angry. But you will see that no PLO spokesperson today, no Palestinian is willing to to denounce Hamas or to condemn Hamas. Once Hamas took over Gaza, Israel began strict blockades and turned Gaza into the largest open-air prison in the world. The question that Hussam Zamlat, the Palestinian ambassador to the UK, asked is why Israel will not negotiate with the PLO. It recognizes Israel, it commits to negotiations and non-violence, to international law and resolutions. All that Israel has to do is end occupation and stop its colonial expansion. Why, Zamlat asks, is the international community, which was supposed to provide accountability and guarantees, available only to defend Israel? So this is the ongoing scene off camera, which Ginsburg reminds us about, in which October 7th saw the beginning of a prison break and the brutal repression that followed on all the remaining prisoners. Meanwhile, the mainstream media is compliant with Zionist propaganda. Many of you would have seen the meme with 3 different headlines in rapid succession on the same event in the New York Times, the bombing of the hospitals in Gaza. The first headline said, Israel strike kills hundreds in hospital. The second headline said, it changed online. The headline online changed. At least 500 dead in strike on Gaza hospital. And finally, the headline you will see now is at least 500 dead in blast at Gaza hospital. This is the kind of power that the Zionist propaganda has. This is the kind of power that Zionism has over global media. You know about the Israeli Defense Forces claim, which went viral, that women, children, toddlers, and the elderly were brutally butchered in an ISIS way of action, and we are aware of these heinous acts, but at the same time, IDF has refused to confirm this officially. It said to a publication, we cannot confirm it officially, but you can assume it happened and believe the report. An Israeli woman, survivor of the Hamas assault on settlements near the Gaza boundary on October 7th, she went viral in an interview in which she said, an Israeli woman who lived in a kibbutz, who was among those who was attending the rave, and she escaped. She went viral in an interview in which she said that the Israeli civilians were undoubtedly killed by indiscriminate firing by Israeli forces themselves. Yasmin Porat is her name. She said they eliminated everyone, including the hostages. She said this to Israeli radio. She said this to Israeli TV. She said that before the Israeli forces attacked, she and other civilians held by Hamas for several hours had been treated humanely. She said this. She said, luckily nothing happened to me like what I heard in the media. But we don't know if what we heard in the media was at all true. The eyewitness account is that they were treated humanely. Naturally, she has been denounced by Israeli media as a Hamas propagandist. All over the world, protests for Palestine are being stopped by states. In the UK, SOAS students have been suspended for a protest supporting Palestine. A former UK diplomat, Craig Murray, has been detained in UK under counter-terrorism laws for declaring support for Palestine at a rally in Iceland. This is how terrified the powers that be are of the support for Palestine. In our country, of course, we know that support rallies for Palestine in many cities and universities have faced police action, reprimands, detentions. In Uttar Pradesh, the Yogi government arrested a Muslim cleric for expressing support for Palestine on an FB post. The chief minister had warned against any activity contrary to the views of the center on the Israel-Palestine conflict. Now, quite apart from the fact that people have the right to hold opinions completely contrary to that of the center on any matter whatsoever, the center has in fact expressed views that carefully do not alienate West Asian allies by condemning both the Indian government statement condemned both the violation of humanitarian law and terrorism. The first refers to Israel, the second refers to Hamas. In addition, the Ministry of External Affairs a few days ago reiterated that India supports the establishment of a sovereign, independent and viable state of Palestine. So the UPCM will have to explain which view of the center we should not go against before jailing people indiscriminately. What does it mean that those showing solidarity with Palestinians are being criminalized by state authorities in many parts of the world, while many European countries, Israelis and Jews more generally, are being portrayed as victims? This comes about through two kinds of conflations. The conflation of anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism, which is like the conflation of anti-Hindutva with anti-Hinduism. But it also includes the conflation of Palestinians with terrorism. So the Frankfurt Book Fair cancelled the award for Palestinian author Adania Shibli's novel Minor Detail, which is based on the true story of a rape and murder of a Bedouin girl by the Israeli army in 1949. Her award was cancelled because this conflation of anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism is most pronounced in Germany with its load of historical guilt, which it has conveniently pushed on Palestinians to bear. In the emerging political configuration, what is the solution? The conventional one-state solution has been rendered impossible by Israel. The two-state solution is now unsustainable, as Achin also pointed out. In this scenario, some voices in the Palestinian resistance to the Zionist occupation advocate a binational state of Palestine-Israel or Israel-Palestine. Similar views are held by some anti-occupation Israelis too. That is one state for Israelis and Palestinians with equal citizenship rights for all, based on, as Ilan Pape puts it, principles of justice, reconciliation and coexistence.
नेशनल दस्तक की आपसे गुजारिश है कि अगर इसको बचाना चाहते हैं तो नेशनल दस्तक को सब्सक्राइब करने के लिए रेड कलर के सब्सक्राइब बटन को दबाएं, फिर बेल आइकन की घंटी दबाएं। नेशनल दस्तक को बचाने के लिए बहुत जरूरी है कि हर खबर को शेयर करें, लाइक करें, कमेंट जरूर करें।